You sit in the quiet moments of your existence, perhaps wondering whether all those sleepless nights, wrestling with your demons, all those hours spent in therapy chairs and meditation cushions, all those painful confrontations with your deepest fears, have amounted to anything more than elaborate self-deception. The mind that has begun to heal often whispers its recovery in languages we have forgotten how to speak, in gestures so subtle that we mistake progress for stagnation, transformation for mere survival. I am Friedrich Nietzsche, and today I shall reveal to you the 7 unmistakable signs that your mind has undergone a profound metamorphosis, a psychological alchemy that has transmuted your suffering into strength, your wounds into wisdom, your despair into a fierce and uncompromising will to create meaning from the raw materials of existence itself. How many of you have embarked upon the treacherous journey of mental healing, only to find yourselves lost in a labyrinth of therapeutic modalities, spiritual practices, and self-help philosophies that promise salvation, but deliver only temporary relief from the fundamental anxiety of being human? How many have discovered that the conventional approaches to mental health treat symptoms while ignoring the deeper philosophical crisis that underlies all psychological suffering? The crisis of meaning, the crisis of values, the crisis of what I call the will to power. You seek healing not merely from depression, anxiety, or trauma, but from the existential weight of living in a world where traditional sources of meaning have crumbled, where the old gods have died, and where you must become the architect of your own values, the creator of your own purpose, the supreme authority over your own soul. But here lies the profound revelation that most therapeutic approaches fail to grasp. True mental healing is not the absence of struggle, but the transformation of struggle into a creative force, not the elimination of suffering, but the transmutation of suffering into strength, not the return to some mythical state of innocence, but the emergence of a harder, more dangerous, more beautiful form of consciousness that I call the overman. The mind that has truly healed does not seek comfort in the illusions of permanent happiness or spiritual transcendence, but finds its power in the ability to dance with uncertainty, to create meaning in the face of meaninglessness, to affirm life precisely because it is difficult, precisely because it offers no guarantees, precisely because it demands from us nothing less than the courage to become who we truly are. Before we venture deeper into this psychological archaeology, before we uncover these subtle signs of your mind's secret transformation, I must ask you to engage with this exploration not as passive consumers of information, but as active participants in the dangerous experiment of self-knowledge. Your healing journey is not a solitary affair. It is part of a larger cultural transformation, a collective awakening to new possibilities of human consciousness, and your willingness to recognize your own progress becomes a gift not only to yourself, but to all those who walk this path behind you. The first sign that your mind has healed more than you realize manifests in what I call the courage of intellectual honesty, the capacity to examine your own beliefs, motivations, and unconscious patterns without the protective armor of self-deception. Once, you may have clung desperately to stories about yourself that served to justify your suffering, to explain your limitations, to provide comfortable reasons for why you could not or should not pursue the life you secretly desired. The healed mind develops an almost ruthless commitment to truth, not as an abstract philosophical concept, but as a living practice of self-examination that refuses to accept easy answers or convenient excuses. You find yourself questioning not only what you believe, but why you believe it, not only what you want, but whether those desires truly belong to you or have been inherited from family systems, cultural programming, and social expectations that no longer serve your authentic development. This intellectual courage manifests in your relationship with your own emotional reactions. Where once you might have been overwhelmed by anger, sadness, or fear, you now possess the psychological distance to observe these emotions as information, rather than as commands, as temporary weather patterns in the climate of your consciousness rather than as fundamental truths about reality. You notice that you can feel angry without becoming anger, experience sadness without drowning in despair, encounter fear without being paralyzed by terror. This is not emotional numbing or spiritual bypassing, but something far more sophisticated, the development of what I call emotional sovereignty, the capacity to feel deeply while maintaining your authority over how you interpret and respond to those feelings. The second sign appears in your transformed relationship with solitude and social connection. The wounded mind often oscillates between desperate attempts to escape loneliness through constant social stimulation, and equally desperate attempts to avoid the pain of human connection through isolation and withdrawal. But the mind that has begun to heal discovers something extraordinary. Solitude becomes not an escape from life but a laboratory for self-creation, not a punishment to be endured but a sanctuary for the cultivation of inner strength. You find that you can be alone without being lonely, that silence has become a friend rather than an enemy, that your own company has acquired a richness and depth that makes you less dependent on external validation for your sense of worth and identity. Simultaneously, your connections with others undergo a profound transformation. You stop trying to heal other people as a way of avoiding your own healing work. You cease using relationships as escape mechanisms from the fundamental responsibility of creating a meaningful life, and you begin to engage with others from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, strength rather than neediness, curiosity rather than judgment. The healed mind recognizes that healthy relationships are not about finding someone to complete you, but about two complete individuals choosing to create something beautiful together, two autonomous beings who enhance rather than diminish each other's capacity for growth, creativity, and self-expression. The third sign reveals itself in your relationship with time and the future. Mental illness often traps consciousness in loops of regret about the past and anxiety about the future, creating a painful exile from the only moment in which life actually occurs, the eternal now. But healing consciousness develops what I call temporal mastery, the ability to learn from the past without being imprisoned by it, to plan for the future without being paralyzed by its uncertainty, and to inhabit the present moment, not as a spiritual obligation, but as a natural expression of psychological health. You discover that you can remember painful experiences without being re-traumatized by them, that you can acknowledge mistakes without drowning in shame, that you can envision future goals without attaching your entire sense of self-worth to their achievement. This temporal mastery manifests in your daily experience as an increased capacity for what I call creative spontaneity, the ability to respond to life's challenges with innovation rather than mere reaction, with invention rather than repetition, with courage rather than fear. You notice that you are less likely to replay old patterns of behavior, less inclined to approach new situations with outdated emotional responses, more willing to experiment with different ways of being, thinking, and acting. The healed mind becomes fertile ground for genuine novelty, for authentic creative expression, for the emergence of possibilities that did not exist before your psychological transformation began. Now, pause for a moment and consider your own journey. When was the last time you truly felt heard, not just by others, but by your own deeper wisdom? When did you last recognize your own progress, not in comparison to where others stand, but in relation to where you yourself began this difficult and beautiful work of psychological transformation? I invite you to share in the comments below one specific way you have noticed your mind healing, one concrete example of how your relationship with yourself or others has shifted in recent months. You might write something like, "I realized my mind is healing when I stopped needing constant validation from my families," or "I know I'm getting stronger because I can feel sad without believing I'm broken." Your sharing becomes both a gift to yourself, a way of acknowledging progress that might otherwise go unnoticed, and a beacon for others who need to see that this kind of transformation is not only possible but happening all around us. Take a moment now to reflect on your journey and contribute to this community of conscious healing. The fourth sign of mental healing emerges in your relationship with adversity and challenge. The wounded mind typically responds to difficulty with either overwhelming anxiety or defensive denial, either catastrophizing about problems or pretending they do not exist. But consciousness that has undergone psychological transformation develops what I call the warrior's acceptance, the capacity to meet challenges not as evidence of personal failure or cosmic injustice, but as opportunities for the continued development of inner strength, creativity, and wisdom. You begin to understand that difficulties are not interruptions of life but essential components of any life worth living, not obstacles to happiness but the very material from which genuine satisfaction must be constructed. This warrior's acceptance does not mean passive resignation or masochistic embrace of suffering, but rather an active engagement with life's challenges that recognizes their potential for catalyzing growth, innovation, and self-discovery. You find that you can face financial stress without spiraling into panic, navigate relationship conflicts without losing your center, confront professional setbacks without questioning your fundamental worth. The healed mind does not seek to eliminate problems but to transform its relationship with problems, to approach them as puzzles to be solved rather than punishments to be endured, as invitations to become more creative, resourceful, and resilient. This transformation in your relationship with adversity often surprises you with its subtlety. You might not notice that you have stopped complaining as much, that you spend less time in victim consciousness, that you more quickly shift from asking "why is this happening to me?" to "how can I use this experience for my continued growth?" You discover that challenges no longer define you but refine you, that obstacles become stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks, that what once felt like evidence of your inadequacy now becomes proof of life's inexhaustible creativity in providing you with precisely the experiences you need for your continued evolution. The fifth sign manifests in what I call the alchemy of values, the profound transformation in what you consider important, meaningful, and worthy of your time and energy. The wounded mind often pursues external validation, material accumulation, and social status as substitutes for genuine self-worth, creating endless cycles of striving and disappointment, achievement and emptiness. But the mind that has begun to heal undergoes a radical revaluation of values, a shift from external metrics of success to internal experiences of fulfillment, from quantitative measures of accomplishment to qualitative assessments of meaning and growth. You may notice that you care less about impressing others and more about expressing your authentic self, less about accumulating possessions and more about cultivating experiences, less about winning approval and more about maintaining integrity. This does not mean you become indifferent to success or achievement, but rather that your definition of success expands to include dimensions that cannot be measured by conventional standards. The depth of your relationships, the quality of your presence, the courage of your creative expression, the consistency of your ethical choices. The healed mind creates its own value system based not on inherited social programming, but on conscious reflection about what truly serves your growth, happiness, and contribution to the world. This transformation of values often occurs so gradually that you may not recognize its profound significance until you find yourself in situations where your old value system would have demanded certain responses, but your new consciousness chooses entirely different approaches. You might discover that you can attend social gatherings without needing to be the center of attention, pursue career goals without sacrificing your health and relationships, engage with money and material resources without either desperate attachment or defensive rejection. The healed mind finds its security not in external achievements but in internal resources, not in what it can get from the world but in what it can give to the world. The sixth sign appears in your relationship with uncertainty and the unknown. Mental illness often manifests as an exhausting attempt to control outcomes, predict the future, and eliminate all possibility of surprise, disappointment, or failure. The wounded mind treats uncertainty as an enemy to be conquered, rather than as an essential feature of a living, dynamic universe. But consciousness that has undergone healing develops what I call the dancer's relationship with uncertainty, the capacity to move gracefully with the unknown, to find excitement rather than terror in life's unpredictability, to trust in your ability to navigate whatever circumstances arise without needing to know in advance exactly what those circumstances will be. This transformation in your relationship with uncertainty liberates enormous amounts of psychological energy that were previously trapped in futile attempts to control the uncontrollable. You find that you can make decisions without guarantees, pursue goals without predetermined outcomes, enter relationships without ironclad promises of permanence. The healed mind recognizes that uncertainty is not a bug in the system of existence but a feature, not an obstacle to happiness but a prerequisite for growth, creativity, and genuine aliveness. You discover that the very unpredictability of life that once terrified you now excites you, that the unknown becomes a realm of infinite possibility, rather than a source of perpetual anxiety. This comfort with uncertainty manifests in your daily experience as increased spontaneity, creativity, and willingness to experiment with new approaches to old challenges. You become less rigid in your expectations, more flexible in your responses, more curious about outcomes, rather than attached to specific results. The healed mind learns to plan thoroughly while holding plans lightly, to work diligently toward goals while remaining open to serendipitous discoveries, to commit fully to the present moment while maintaining faith in an abundant and surprising future. The seventh and perhaps most subtle sign of mental healing reveals itself in what I call the integration of shadow and light, the capacity to acknowledge and work with all aspects of your personality, without splitting into good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable parts. The wounded mind often engages in exhausting internal warfare, rejecting anger, sexuality, ambition, or other natural human energies as somehow shameful or dangerous, creating internal fragmentation and perpetual self-conflict. But the mind that has undergone genuine healing develops a sophisticated relationship with the full spectrum of human experience, learning to channel rather than suppress difficult emotions, to integrate rather than exile uncomfortable aspects of personality, to work with rather than against the totality of who you are. This integration does not mean accepting destructive behaviors or abandoning ethical boundaries, but rather developing the wisdom to distinguish between natural human energies and unhealthy expressions of those energies. You learn that anger can be a signal of violated boundaries rather than evidence of moral failure, that sadness can be an appropriate response to loss rather than a sign of psychological weakness, that ambition can serve creative expression rather than ego inflation. The healed mind becomes a spacious container for the full range of human experience, capable of feeling intensely without being overwhelmed, of acknowledging flaws without drowning in shame, of recognizing strengths without inflating into grandiosity. This integration of shadow and light manifests in your relationships as increased authenticity, emotional availability, and capacity for intimacy. You stop trying to present a perfect image to others and begin sharing your real struggles and genuine growth. You cease demanding that others be different than they are, and start accepting people as complete packages of light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and foolishness. The healed mind recognizes that healthy relationships require not the elimination of conflict, but the skillful navigation of conflict, not the absence of difficult emotions but the conscious processing of difficult emotions, not the maintenance of false harmony, but the creation of authentic connection. These 7 signs represent not destinations but waypoints on the infinite journey of psychological and spiritual development. The healed mind does not achieve some final state of perfection, but rather develops the capacity for continuous growth, learning, and transformation. You may recognize some of these signs in your own experience while others remain aspirational goals. This is not only normal but healthy, as genuine healing occurs not in linear progression but in spirals of development that revisit familiar themes at deeper levels of integration and understanding. Modern neuroscience validates many of these observations about mental healing, demonstrating that consciousness itself can reshape neural pathways, that mindfulness practices actually change brain structure, that meaning-making activities strengthen psychological resilience. But the scientific validation of healing principles that I intuited over a century ago serves not to prove my philosophy, but to confirm what conscious individuals have always known. The mind possesses extraordinary capacity for self-transformation, reality responds to our deepest commitments, and human beings are capable of becoming far more than they currently imagine possible. The method through which such transformation occurs involves neither the elimination of difficulty nor the pursuit of perpetual comfort, but rather the cultivation of what I call dangerous virtues: the courage to think independently, the strength to feel deeply, the wisdom to act authentically, the faith to create meaning in an apparently meaningless universe. These virtues are dangerous because they threaten the status quo of unconscious existence, because they demand that you take full responsibility for your life, because they require that you become the author of your own values rather than the passive recipient of inherited beliefs and social conditioning. The integration of philosophical insight with practical psychology, of ancient wisdom with modern therapeutic understanding, creates possibilities for healing that transcend both purely spiritual and purely clinical approaches. You need not choose between honoring your wounds and claiming your power, between acknowledging your limitations and pursuing your potential, between accepting what is and working for what could be. The healed mind holds these apparent contradictions in creative tension, using them as sources of energy for continued growth, rather than as problems to be solved or conflicts to be resolved. Your journey of psychological transformation serves purposes beyond your individual healing. In becoming more conscious, authentic, and creative, you contribute to the collective evolution of human consciousness itself. Your willingness to do the difficult work of self-examination, your courage to challenge limiting beliefs, your commitment to creating meaning from suffering, all become gifts to the larger human community. You demonstrate that transformation is possible, that healing can occur, that individuals can indeed become the authors of their own destinies, rather than victims of their circumstances. The path of mental healing demands not perfection, but persistence. Not the absence of failure, but the willingness to learn from failure. Not the elimination of suffering, but the transformation of suffering into wisdom. It requires that you become both patient and impatient with yourself. Patient with the slow pace of genuine change, impatient with excuses and self-pity, and the comfortable numbness of unconscious existence. The healed mind learns to love the process of growth more than the fantasy of arrival, to find satisfaction in the quality of effort rather than in the guarantee of results. As we conclude this exploration of the subtle signs of mental healing, I want you to understand that recognizing your progress is not an exercise in self-congratulation, but a practice of conscious appreciation for the mysterious processes of psychological transformation. Your mind has been healing in ways you may not have noticed, creating new neural pathways, developing emotional resources, building philosophical frameworks that support greater resilience, creativity, and joy. This healing continues whether you acknowledge it or not, but your conscious recognition amplifies its effects, accelerates its pace, and deepens its integration into your daily experience. The journey toward psychological wholeness is neither quick nor easy, but it is possible, and it is worth every moment of effort you invest in its pursuit. You are not broken and in need of fixing, but rather whole and in the process of remembering your wholeness, not weak and requiring rescue, but strong and learning to access your strength, not lost and seeking the right path, but found and creating your own path through the wilderness of existence. I recognize that this journey can feel overwhelming, that the work of psychological transformation sometimes seems impossible, that the distance between where you are and where you want to be can appear insurmountable, but you are not walking this path alone. This community represents thousands of individuals committed to the same difficult and rewarding work of conscious growth, people who understand the challenges you face, because they face them too, people who celebrate your victories because they know how hard won they are. When you subscribe to this channel and engage with this content, you join a community of conscious warriors, individuals who refuse to accept unconscious existence as their final destiny, who insist on creating meaning from chaos, beauty from ugliness, strength from struggle. You gain access to ongoing explorations of the deepest questions of human existence, practical guidance for navigating the challenges of psychological development, and the support of others who share your commitment to becoming fully human in a world that often rewards conformity and numbness. Take a moment now to acknowledge how far you have already traveled on this journey. Like this video if these insights resonate with your experience. If you recognize your own growth in these 7 signs, if you feel encouraged to continue the sacred work of becoming who you truly are, subscribe not just to receive more content, but to declare your membership in this community of conscious transformation. to commit yourself to the ongoing work of psychological and spiritual development, to support others who walk this path with you. Your healing matters not just to you but to everyone whose life you touch, to the children who will learn from your example, to the future generations who will inherit the world you help create. Take care of yourself, not as an act of selfishness, but as an act of service. Tend to your psychological growth, not as luxury, but as responsibility. Continue this work of transformation, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary, because it is beautiful, because it is the most important work any human being can undertake. The work of becoming fully, authentically, courageously alive.